Hello there. This video is going to be a bit different to my usual shitlordery, but I hope you enjoy it nonetheless, despite the perhaps morbidity of the subject. Recently I was on holiday, and after sharing some pictures on Twitter, a few people asked if I would talk about my travels. I visited York in the northeast of England as a halfway point between my home and my ultimate destination, which was France. I'd never been to France before. It was an experience to drive my hire car into a train. My journey was for a more sombre reason though. On the 9th of April 1917, my great-grandfather's brother was killed in action at the Battle of Arras, and I sought to commemorate the centenary of his death by visiting his grave and other battlefields and cemeteries of northern France. Through genealogical research, I knew where he was buried, what his rank and regiment were, but before my trip I couldn't be certain of which battle he died in. Considering the Battle of Arras commenced on the 9th of April, and this was the date he died, added to the fact his place of burial's proximity to Arras, it seemed likely, but I hoped to find out for certain. This was confirmed after visiting Carrier Wellington Museum in Arras, but I will return to that later. After finding the cemetery in which my great-granduncle was interred, I took in the atmosphere, sat on one of the stone benches, and wrote an entry in my diary. It is a beautiful day, clear blue skies, about 21 degrees centigrade, hazy, a slight breeze, a very unassuming resting spot for around 200 servicemen. There is a small green sign from the main street pointing up a perfectly manicured narrow grass track to the cemetery. There is a gate at the top of the track, with a cemetery register box built into one of the pillars. In it, a few people over the last few years, including 2 women from home, have left messages as to the purpose of their visit. I, of course, also signed. Tightly packed rows of identical headstones face away from the gate. A huge crucifix with sword towers over them all. The back wall facing the stones has 2 benches with stone plaques, one in English, the other in French, either side of the crucifix. An ornate stone wall surrounds the small cemetery, which sits in close proximity to houses of red brick, akin to those found in England. An ice cream van goes past, but doesn't disturb the dead. There is a serene peacefulness and calm amidst those who go about their daily lives, but they are doubtless aware of the debt they owe those at rest in this small patch of land, those who made the ultimate sacrifice. I feel saddened but humbled to be free to come and pay my respects to the fallen, especially one of my own flesh and blood. Before travelling to the museum, I stopped at a German military cemetery. It was vast. Rows upon rows of metal crosses spread out in every direction as far as the eye could see. Then I realised that each cross had 2, 3, or even 4 names on them, immediately increasing the amount of dead soldiers by at least double what I had thought. The sheer scale of carnage and destruction was completely incomprehensible. Arriving at the museum, I noticed there was a large group of Scottish school children going for a guided tour, the reason for which I would only discover upon returning home. Unbeknownst to me, there were many commemorations of the Battle of Arras happening on 9th of April, including one featuring the First Minister of Scotland and children from every region of my country. The Battle of Arras had the highest concentration of Scottish troops fighting in a single First World War battle. About 1/3 of the 159,000 Allied casualties were Scots. The Right Reverend Dr. Russell Barr led a service and held up a telegram sent to his wife's forebears informing them of the death of a Black Watch soldier. My great-granduncle was also in the Black Watch. On the 2nd of April 1917, the 9th Scottish Infantry Division, 8th Black Watch Royal Highlanders, and other regiments, amounting to 24,000 soldiers, moved into tunnels that had recently been dug under Arras using pre-existing quarries and stayed there for a week before an offensive against the Western Front on the 9th. These tunnels were dug mostly by New Zealand troops. The point was that the soldiers would blast out of the tunnels and surprise the Germans, pushing them back, and ultimately act as a distraction to draw German reinforcements from the south so that French troops could break through the line elsewhere. The Allied forces managed to push 6 miles into German-held territory, which was a huge amount considering how long there had been a stalemate for. The advance was halted for 1 day, and as the Germans reassembled, the stalemate continued until 1918. 159,000 Allied and 162,000 Germans were killed. If the advance had continued, the war may have been over a year sooner. As I mentioned previously, I was at the Carrier Wellington Museum in Arras. It gets its name from the subterranean quarry that the New Zealanders made safe and named after their birthplace. Other quarries were called Auckland and London. The museum itself is the Wellington Quarry. A guide takes you 70 feet underground, showing you various artefacts and films, including bunks and the steps to the surface that led so many men to their deaths. I have a letter from my great-granduncle addressed to his brother, my great-grandfather, dated 5th of April, so it must have been written while in the caves. Being in the same place that he spent his last week alive and seeing the route that led to his demise was very sobering and powerful. The whole experience was rather harrowing, but I'm glad I made the trip to find out more about my relation. I think the moment that affected me the most was seeing the seemingly endless rows of crosses, and it made me think about how petty a lot of what we discuss on YouTube is. It made me wonder if taking young people to these cemeteries and battlegrounds as some kind of humility training would give them a better perspective and, with any luck, make it less likely for them to repeat history.